Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me at the back there? You can? Well, let's begin with a brief video. In 1887, 23-year-old Willie Chung Sing left the dire poverty of his village in Shinwei with 5 clansmen bound for New Gold Mountain. And over several decades in Launceston, Hobart, Wellington, Hong Kong, and back in China, he survived as farmer, grocer, hawker, and briefly as tin miner. The final words of an account presented by the Chinese authorities a year before he died in 1952 ends, "The last 3 decades, all has been harmonious." My father, Charles, was the youngest of 3 sons destined for Tasmania. He's the baby there. Big brother is much taller. But even before my paternal grandfather left Shinwei, before that, my maternal great-grandfather left his adjoining county of Taishan. But unlike the wily Willie Chung Sing, great-grandfather Jin Zhang stayed in the tin mining town of Reibel, but not once did he send any remittances home. And when his son reached the age of 16, he determined to find the answer to his father's long absence. In 1901, the year of Federation, the year the White Australia policy was born, Jin Zhang stepped foot in Reibel. He discovered his father in an opium den. Determined not to make the mistakes of his father, Jin Zhang, my grandfather, worked furiously. Within 2 years, he saved enough to send his father back to die in the motherland. Only in the motherland can a Chinese spirit rest in peace. From Reibel, he went to hawk vegetables in Launceston, then he ventured south to open a laundry. He ventured into fruit and vegetables and fancy goods. And unlike his opium-addicted father, Jin Zhang, my grandfather, made 5 return visits to Taishan. Once to visit his mother, the second time to marry, the third time to bring out his wife and baby daughter Joyce, the 4th time to buy property in Canton, and the 5th time to travel with the entire family to Taishan, including with my mother, 5-year-old Dorothy, to build a new home in Dragonfield Village. Now, this is where my mother Dorothy was born, at 152 Elizabeth Street, now a Nevada hair salon, where my hair was cut on Wednesday. The business did a roaring trade in cigarette, tobacco, and matches from the timber workers on the other corner at Crispin Gun. It was here that grandfather asked the signwriter to print Hern Lee outside his business. But when he walked outside and saw the signwriter had painted Henry and Co., grandfather chuckled. "Oh, you thought I couldn't pronounce my R's. But Henry is the name of English kings. This will bring me luck. I'll call myself Mr. Henry of Henry and Co." Most reluctantly, as the business was doing so well, most reluctantly, he moved across the road to 153 Elizabeth Street at the request of his brother, who wished to return to China. So he bought his brother's business and turned it into a 2-department store. One side, fruit and vegetables, the other, fancy goods. They operated under different laws, regulation, and opening hours. And it's here that my mother remembered the pain she suffered every morning as she was fitted into leg irons because she had rickets. She had never been given a drop of milk, and her mother regarded her as a worthless, repeatedly telling her, "You're only a girl, only fit to work in a shop. You should have been put in a bucket and drowned at birth." My mother, as a girl, had not been worthy of a wetness. Now, this building, 153 Elizabeth Street, is now part of a Utah's housing complex, and archaeologists have found remnants of Jin Henry family objects, which I saw in 2018. And Dorothy, when she went on her trip at the age of 5 to China on the ship, she discovered a piano and she tinkled one of the ivory keys. She was mesmerized and determined to pester her father until he bought her one. When I saw the family property in 2017, after a very difficult search, the place had run down. But when it was new, grandmother was so delighted with her son's achievement that she said, "Now that I've seen your success, I'm ready to join your father in the afterlife." This slide shows that in 2017, I met a new cousin I didn't know existed. At the age of 5, my mother joined the adults to trek into the countryside for the burial. Dorothy's father regularly took her to the capital, Canton, where her brothers, Gordon and Lester, were at school. And in the seething city, where crime and kidnapping were rife, she gripped her father's hand and kept in her pocket a piece of paper saying in Chinese characters her name and address. One scene she never forgot was watching a rickshaw man eat his lunch. His lunch consisted of a bowl of rice and one thin slice of pork sausage. He popped that pork sausage onto his tongue, savored it, put it back on the rice, shoveled some rice into his mouth, put the sausage back onto his tongue, savored it. He made that one slither of sausage and a bowl of rice last his entire lunch. I had a bowl of noodles in the shop, which is now a cafe, where my mother stayed in this investment property on her visits to Canton. In Canton, her big sister, Chinese-born Joyce, now 16, was baptized into the Catholic Church under the twin towers of Sacred Heart Cathedral. My mother didn't love me because I was only a girl, lamented Joyce. So I sought Christ's love And in so doing, she gave rise to generations of Tasmanian Chinese Catholics. When the Gin Henrys returned down under, the Dragonfield village home was left under the control of the oldest and adopted son, Fon. When Joyce had been born, a mere girl, in 2016, grandfather immediately scoured the village and adopted 3-year-old Fon. Only a boy could continue the family line, could worship the ancestors, could take care of his parents in their old age. A girl would belong to her husband's family. Back in Hobart in 1934, grandfather re-established Henry & Co. at 139 Liverpool Street, opposite the Green Gate, some of you may remember. 9-year-old Dorothy pestered her father to buy a piano, but not wishing to upset his wife, he compromised. He bought her a violin and paid for lessons with Stella Honey. Despite her high marks, Dorothy's mother put her foot down. A waste of money, she said. No more lessons. You're only a girl, only fit to work in a shop. While Joyce worked full-time in the shop, working till late at night when the pictures closed, Dorothy and Mari enrolled at St. Columba's School, until Dorothy had a disagreement with a nun and walked out, much to her later regret. At Elizabeth Street State School, she was bullied and named Ching Chong Chinaman until she stood up for herself and she warned her worst tormentor, "You call me names once more and I'll use my martial arts." "Oh, what'll you do, slit eyes?" A fight declared. The school gathered around in a circle. Dorothy swiftly hit her tormentor in the chest and waited for the return. It didn't come. Bluff had won. When reprimanded by the headmaster, Dorothy's response was prophetic. "One day the dragon will come to Australia. It's here now, gobbling up our crayfish and circumnavigating our waters." Each morning, Dorothy prepared and then walked up Elizabeth Street to feed the chooks kept at their former Elizabeth Street property. After school, she cleaned the pen, collected the eggs, caught a chook, popped it in a Hessian bag, and walked home with the chook, helped her mother kill, cook, and prepare it for dinner. She made a little space on the counter to do her homework in between serving customers. She dreamt of helping her father in the business, and to that end, she enrolled in Commercial High in Moona to learn bookkeeping and accountancy. She persuaded her father to buy her a new Malvern Star bicycle so she could cycle all the way to Moona. Now, this is a photograph circa 1940 of the family, and ironically, the photographer has positioned them in the order in which they would die, with the parents in the front row center Uncle Lester died first in '86. My mother was the last to die in the midst of COVID in Melbourne under lockdown on the 20th of October 2020, the 17th of October 2020. Grandfather Henry, you'll notice, has sunken cheeks. He is not well and will soon be taken by tuberculosis. But not before Archbishop Simmons, in his black soutane, purple sash and biretta, mounted the stairs of the shop to administer the last rites so grandfather could go to heaven. Would he die in the early hours of Monday, the 3rd of February, 1941. The obituary in the Mercury spells the family name G-E-N, and later the family will change that to Y-I-A-N, closer to the Cantonese. Dorothy helped her mother dress her father in his best suit and slipped crisp £1 notes into his pockets, the wherewithal for the afterlife. Her sister Joyce, exhausted and having acted like a mother to Dorothy, but having worked 7 days a week with little pay and no thanks from her mother, left for Brisbane and marriage. Bereft, Dorothy too left. She packed a suitcase, went to Melbourne and stayed with a family friend. There, she had a nervous breakdown. She awoke in the middle of the night and screamed out. She didn't know who she was, where she was. She didn't even know her own name, not until the doctor arrived next morning. Meanwhile, Henry & Co. under Gordon prospered and continued to serve Government House and Archbishop's Palace. And when Dorothy returned, and accompanied by a letter from the doctor saying she needed calm and rest, her mother no longer berated her quite so much. Almost despite herself, the law of life gradually lifted Dorothy upwards. And her brothers, Gordon and Lester, introduced her to their friend and business rival, Charles Chung of Arham & Co. 6 months after her father's death, she sent this photograph to Mabel Wing Dan in Melbourne, as it's inscribed at the back. Named Miss China 1942 by the Hobart Mercury, Dorothy is pictured here in the Chung Gon family's Pekin gift store, just a few doors down from Henry & Co., busily working for Allies' Day on July the 31st, which will be marked by a big fair in the Hobart Town Hall. Dorothy, encouraged by her mother, and Charles, encouraged by his father, married. Willie Chung Sing set them up in a new shop at 99 Liverpool Street, just a block down from 139 Liverpool Street, Henry & Co. And in the original W. Chung Sing & Co. opposite Maya today, Dorothy drew some customers who remembered her from Henry & Co. And behind and above the shop, In less than ideal conditions, she raised her firstborn, Lei Hien. Lei Hien's name was suggested by Willie Chung Sing, based upon a Chinese name meaning something beautiful or something special. I, too, had my initial upbringing at 99 Liverpool Street. But with the marriage of these two young people under strain, Dorothy soon left and returned to Henry and Co. Long before the concept of no-fault divorce, the grounds were adultery or desertion. When Dorothy walked out, in her naivety, she left behind letters from innocent admirers that were later used unfairly against her. When, a year or so before she died, aged 95, I asked her about this, she was sanguine. It didn't matter, she said. I wanted the divorce and I got it. Both grandparents tried to save the marriage. They competed with each other to try and spoil Lei Hien and me. Grandmother stopped crying for the first time after her husband's death. She so adored Lei Hien, who brought a new light into her life. If Lei Hien picked up an egg and let it fall to the floor, grandmother exclaimed, "Oh, isn't she clever?" "We don't need his money," grandmother declared. "The girls will be brought up as Henrys." Alas, Ahu, as we called grandmother, died when I was only 2, leaving Dorothy without means. Only the 3 sons, Gordon, Lester, and Fon, received any direct benefit from the business they'd all helped establish. Despite goodwill on her brother's part, despite her cooking and serving in the shop, despite her hairdressing and her modeling for artists, Dorothy brought Lei Hien and me up with never a guaranteed income. And Lei Hien and I would never forget the constant rows over dinner, over the shop, over who would pay our bills. As things got worse, and when she was desperate, our mother said to Lei Hien, "Pet, you go and cry to Uncle Lester." As his favorite, Lei Hien didn't cry. She just stood at his feet, twisting her hair shyly around her little finger. He wrote out a check. As Lei Hien reminisced as an adult, we had the best of everything. But what we had to go through to get it, no child should have to go through what we went through. As Dorothy tried to instill in us, be independent, get an education. Don't be like me, having to ask for money, only fit to work in a shop. Dorothy's journey beyond the shop began when serving customers at Henry & Co., who asked, "Could we draw you? We've never painted a Chinese face." The outcome was this portrait by Eileen Brooker, her entry into the 1947 Travelling Scholarship Award that was won by her best friend and lover, Olive Richmond. He also drew Dorothy, but that was not his winning entry. And that particular portrait is now on show at TMAG. His success in the Travelling Scholarship Award allowed Olive Richmond to stay abroad for life, and as an assistant to Henry Moore, and then as a sculptor in his own right. Eileen Brooker had invaluable, incalculable influence on Dorothy and Leheen and me. When Dorothy decided she needed to be independent, she decided to learn hairdressing, but she found she was too old to be apprenticed in Hobart, so she had to study in Sydney. Eileen Brooker advised, become an artist's model. The fees will help defray your costs. So she took up modelling in Sydney at East Tech and several other artists' studios. Sydney introduced Dorothy to a new bohemian world of art, books, and ideas. She sat through late-night conversations at King's Cross. Among artists, the conversation being above her head. But she absorbed a little and was able to filter some of that through to Leheen and me. So although our mother had less than 6 years schooling, we grew up over the shop in a rich cultural milieu, with the strains of the violin, the radio, the wireless, tuned to classical music, or the children's hour, prints of Miro and Picasso on the walls, tomato cases filled with penguin paperbacks, and children's versions of Chaucer and Shakespeare among our earliest books. Now, I'm showing here some images, mostly by Max Angus, because Dorothy posed for him for over 40 years, and most students throw away their sketches. And this, of course, includes a charcoal from Alison Alexander's biography of Max Angus. Eileen Brooker was responsible for Leheen's self-portrait, age 6, representing China, where she'd never been, of course, to be published in an international book of children's portraits. This is Eileen and Dorothy posing as Janaki and Shivaram, 2 Indian dancers who had just toured Tasmania. They're at the Artists' Ball of 1950, held at the Hobart City Hall. Now, when I was 6 and playing with plasticine on the floor, Uncle Gordon entered the room. He looked down at me and he said, "Whoa," using my pet name, "your father's going back to China to bring you back a stepmother." I heard my mother's voice. "You're not getting any stepmother, not till I'm dead." I became aware of my father's new wife and growing family. My mother set her hair several times, while I saw children in my father's 4 Charles fruit stores. The 4 children knew nothing about Leheen and me. What we didn't know was that our father had a Chinese wife. And that wife became his wife when he'd been taken back to China as a teenager for an arranged marriage. Nor did we know that after the divorce, he returned to his first wife and sired a son younger than I. He also opened a milk bar, I suspect on the example of the Green Gate. He opened a milk bar in Xinwei City, a risky business in that non-milk consuming China of the era. One of my occasional errands was to visit my father with bills. In 1955, some of you may recall, the new Richardson's building opened. It revolutionized Hobart with the first car park, the first cappuccino machine at the Manhattan, the first newsreel theatre at the Tatler, and the first supermarket launched by Gordon Henry. Down the steps in the basement, my father and his two brothers opened the first Chinese restaurant, the Golden Dragon. I stepped down towards the Golden Dragon, trembling with bills for my father. I was not so frightened by my father as by the front of house lady, a tall Caucasian with dyed black hair. One look at me, she said, "Sit over there, your father's busy." I sat with my legs dangling over the floor until summoned to my father's office, where there was a brief exchange as he sat impeccably dressed in a suit across his always tidy desk. Once our father collected Leihin and me and took us across the river to the new home he was building in Tranmere Road. He opened a tin of primer, gave us each a brush, and we painted. When I was 16, we held a party there. We rolled up with carloads of friends and bottles of beer and soft drinks, platters of fruit and nibbles and stacks of records. We were going to rock around the clock that night, gyrate to Tutti Frutti, Ah Rooty, a rop bop a lulok, a lop bamboo. During the party, our father stood looking on from the kitchen, then disappeared. When the guests had all left by 3 a.m., we switched on the lights and couldn't bear the scene of overflowing ashtrays and empty plates and half-emptied bottles and glasses. We took one look and said, "We'll clean up in the morning," and fell into bed. When we awoke next morning, our father was nowhere in sight, but he'd cleaned everything thoroughly. The cushions all plumped and the kitchen sparkling. Some time later, Charles returned from Hong Kong with new wife, Susan, who gave him a stepson and his 9th child, baby Anne. This shows the couple hosting their own party in their Tranmere Road home. I grew up entirely with my mother and her Henry family and my mother's partners. We first moved temporarily from the shop to stay at Uncle Gordon's new house at 7 Edge Avenue, Lenna Valley, when he was overseas getting married and honeymooning. A frequent visitor then was New Zealand-born artist Gordon Walters, and Dorothy weekly modelled for 3 Hobart artists, Max Angus, Taz Felberg, and Stephen Walker. The head of the Lady Franklin Museum also wished to join, but he was forbidden to join by decree of his wife, who believed he should be spared the sight of a naked woman. We left the shop permanently when I was 9, and Dorothy rented the first of 3 rental premises with radio announcer Rex Walden, known for his deep, resonant voice. Rex organized a small part for me in an ABC broadcast, which gave me my first cheque for £1, 8 shillings and 4pence. Dorothy adopted an unwanted German shepherd from across the road who kept on howling. And this was only the first of a series of shepherds. She also bought an MG TF 1500 in red, which was paid for by Lester, whom my mother paid back weekly because she needed something to bring home the parcels. I don't know why she didn't choose a Holden. At 33, in 1958, she drove Leheen and me down to Longley to rent the former Devonshire tea rooms of Hawthorne Dean, owned by Tasmania's former founding director of adult education, Egyptologist Leslie Greener. He lived in the cottage with his son Guy, but the path from the landlord's cottage to our rented house soon became worn, and the 2 families became one. Later, Rex joined Longley, and his half-Maori son spruced up the coachman's cottage. A blended, multicultural family, decades ahead of its time. I can say that now publicly, but at the time, it was excruciating. This drove Leheen and me even further beyond the happy family Anglo-Celtic norm. We were the only Chinese at our school, St. Mary's College, with between 500 to 600 girls, the only 2 Chinese for most of my years at school. Our mother called herself Miss Henry, when the term Ms. didn't exist. No such thing as single mothers. Miss referred to young unmarried ladies or spinsters with baskets and cats, according to Enid Blyton books. And now my mother was living in a ménage à trois. Yet Leheen and I somehow survived. When our mother accompanied Leslie to Egypt, we stayed with our uncles Gordon and Lester. And we were still at Longley in 1965 when snow blanketed the property, and we couldn't be driven up to town by Mama. We had to wait and get the Huonville bus to cover that dangerous winding road on the side of Mount Wellington to town. Rex's death in 1966 prompted our move to 3 Lambert Avenue, Sandy Bay, where Dorothy lived for the next 33 years. Now, like Rex, Leslie freelanced with the ABC. He was an actor, commentator, and scriptwriter. So it was easy for him to introduce me to the then ABC manager, Arthur Winter. And so, begin my 30-year career with the ABC. At Lambert Avenue, Dorothy worked for Leicester at Tutti Frutti in Lower Sandy Bay to cover the cost of my books. She cultivated camellias, and she regularly won the best prize for the most beautifully kept jaguar of her class. After winning it constantly, she withdrew from the competition to give others a chance. This shows the only time Leheen and I were in Egypt at the same time as our mother. When Leheen became ill in 1998, and again in 2000, Dorothy made her last trips to London. And after Leheen died, at the end of New Year's Day, 2001, Dorothy stayed kneeling, praying for her soul till the white winter's dawn. Living in Melbourne from 1999 intensified Dorothy's religious bent. The bad Catholic mother whom I'd known now went daily to the packed St. Francis Church, just a block from her unit in the CBD. She immersed herself in religious memorabilia, rosary beads, Mary medals, printed and handwritten by herself prayers. She always had a mass celebrated on the anniversary of Leheen's death. And even after her final fall, just before Christmas 2019, when she broke her collarbone and was confined to a wheelchair, she insisted on attending Leheen's New Year's Day Mass. In Melbourne in 2012, I had my first meal with my father at the Red Emperor in South Bank. He'd flown over to see his son, Christopher, who was in ill health. Now that led to my visiting my father on occasional visits to Hobart when I saw those paintings of his and produced that video. And I'm so pleased that I had this opportunity to get to know my father a little before he died, aged 98. Throughout Dorothy's almost equally long life, she read widely on different philosophical systems and belief systems, beginning with Krishnamurti in her 20s. At Lambert Avenue, she had a scroll of controversial Indian guru Sai Baba in the hallway, and in the bedroom, she lit candles before statues of Our Lady. As my partner John put it, having a bob each way. In Melbourne, she went to the Theosophical Society, joined the Spiritualist Society, and subscribed to the UK journal Two Worlds. Even when advanced macular degeneration meant she could barely read, she insisted that the well-bookmarked 3 volumes of Bertrand Russell's autobiography remain on her desk. One of the last books that totally absorbed my mother was Antonia Fraser's Must You Go? My Life with Harold Pinter. Dorothy wrote down its final words and pointed them out to me. I leant forward and found no breath. He looked white and dead. I sat for a while, then I kissed him. His dear body was already quite cool. Must you go? Yes, it was time. Before I left the room, and after another last kiss, I said, "Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels wing thee to thy rest." Charles and Dorothy were the last of their generations of Chungs and Henrys. But 5 generations of Chungs and 6 of Henrys continue in Tasmania and around the world. And in their numbers, these 2 families, who long ago abandoned fruit and vegetables as a livelihood, and despite the arrival of thousands of Chinese from all parts of the world, the Henrys and the Chungs continue as the backbone of the Tasmanian Chinese.